Excuse me. Okay, looks like we are good to go. Let me just get a couple things pulled up here. Winging it a little bit today. I was the epitome of procrastination yesterday and didn't get my notes together. And well, I was the epitome of procrastination right up to today, which is why I'm a few minutes late. Sorry about that. Um, but here we are for number 7. Actually, this is about 6 more than I ever thought I would do. But we are talking about book number 7, which is the most recent one, Brianna and the Three, and probably the one, um, the one book that of all my stories, is the one that I never thought would ever be finished or would ever see publication. So, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Uh, Essentially, Brianna and the Three is set in the distant future. It's the farthest in the future I've gone. It's the year 7869. And basically, it's a kidnapping. A woman is kidnapped, and it falls to Archangel Brianna Pandora to rescue her. I'll explain the rank in a moment. As an officer in the Angel Corps, Brianna is responsible for defending Earth, its colonies, and its citizens, as well as training newer Corps members. When given the assignment, she thinks there won't be any difficulty. However, when tracing the victim's last known movements, Brianna finds there may be more to the kidnapping than she first thought. Tracking the victim to a distant colony world, Brianna must deal not only with her own insecurities, but with the three mythological warriors who may or may not even exist. Now, this, as I've said multiple times before, I am not a fast writer. I'm I'm extremely slow. Part of it has to do with the way I write, because I don't plot, I don't plan anything out, I don't figure things out um, before I start writing. Sometimes I know where it's going. Sometimes I have to figure that out while I'm on the way. Generally, this is referred to as being a seat of the pants writer. I prefer this. I prefer this because I think it gives the story a more organic feel, growing almost naturally instead of through pre-plotted, uh, through a pre-planned route. But most of the time, I know I figure out where I'm going, and then things get started. Now, let me give you a bit of background on the history of the story, because Brianna and the Three is, as I said, is the one story that was almost abandoned. Excuse me. I wrote the first draft back in 2000, 2001. I had finished the first draft relatively quickly, or relatively quickly for me, but I didn't do anything with it for a while, a long while. I moved on to other projects and always thought I would get back to it. The trouble was, when I did get back to it and reread it, I thought it was terrible. The plot line was good, and I liked the character, and I liked the main character, but it kind of failed in execution. So I put it aside again and thought I'd get back to it eventually. Years pass, and from time to time, I would thought about printing out the story to see if I could get it ready for publication. And for a very short time, it was going to be included in Campfire Stories. But I realized it required too much work. It literally had to be rewritten beginning to end. And still, I would tinker with the story from time to time, but there was always another project to work on, so the story of Brianna Pandora had to wait. Finally, last year, I decided that I would make one last pass at the story. I'd give it a thorough and aggressive rewrite, or as I like to call it, a very deep line by line editing. Excuse me. When I finished, the story would be ready for publication or would finally be put aside. So starting at the beginning, I rewrote the story, polished up the dialogue, cleared up some problems about Brianna's personal history, and then I put it through my typical editing cycle, which is every 6 weeks of excuse me, every 6 weeks there's a new edit that gives me time to stop thinking about the story, so that when I come back to it, it's cleaner. It's a clean. I can look at it from a clean point of view. Now, when I finally finish it, it actually took 6 edits, when usually about 4 is to get a story to the point where I think it's good to be published. And I gave it out to a few people to read, and they seemed to like it. The people I gave it to liked it, including an anonymous beta reader that I contacted through Goodreads. And I was satisfied with the story. I actually liked it. I liked the way it turned out. I liked the way it progressed. I liked the person Brianna became, although she did surprise me a couple times. Uh, and if nothing else, Brianna and the Three is a tribute to perseverance and not knowing when to say enough. Sometimes you have to, and God knows I've done that before. Although there is another story that I've been trying to start now for 3 years, that I'm finally just starting now because the characters would not stop screaming at me. 3 years? No, was it 6? 6 years, excuse me. I've been trying to start this story for 6 years, but that's another video. But the interesting thing about Brianna and the Three has to do with some of the things that were running through my mind as I was editing it. Uh, as I was going through the various edits, I found myself making changes, taking things out, rewriting things, going more elaborate in some descriptions and things. But that's no problem, right? That's what you're supposed to do when you're edit. Except that I found myself making changes not because I thought they would make the story better, but because I was anticipating people getting bothered or upset by some of the things in the story. Let me give you a little bit more background into the story, and um, if you're planning on reading it, to quote River Song, spoilers. Uh, the main character of the story is named Brianna Pandora. She holds the rank of Archangel. Now, that's not a religious title. In the years prior to the story, Earth for a time had been had been governed by a theocracy that was overthrown in part by Brianna's great grandmother Entendre, who does turn up in the story in one form or another. Um, but the military was referred to as the Angel Corps, and they just held on to the title after the government changed over from a theocracy to a more representative democracy. Within the Angel Corps, those who hold the rank of Archangel are both soldiers and teachers, with each Archangel responsible for a squad of 12 angels, ranking from Senior Angel, who's essentially the second in command and generally the next one to be promoted, down to the neophytes, the rookies, just out of the academy. For some assignments, Archangels work alone rather than employing their whole squads. Each Archangel is excuse me. Each Archangel is assigned an AI who maintains contact with the Archangel via a small portable unit that's worn on the belt or via circuitry implanted in the Archangel's brain, which is referred to as a Neuralink. It also can allow private communication between the Archangel and the AI. Now we get into what was beginning to bother me. While Brianna is well regarded within the ranks of the Corps, she does have some insecurities and neurosis. She tends to be very hard on herself and takes criticism very personally. She doesn't like making mistakes and often chastises herself when she acts on instinct rather than stopping and thinking. Early in the story, after meeting to discuss her assignment, Brianna heads out and cruises the downtown district. The story actually starts off in Ottawa, looking for some companionship for the night. The trouble is, she can't decide what kind of companionship she's looking for, and to quote, "I was becoming discouraged. I didn't see anyone I wanted to get to know better. My own fault, really. I couldn't decide what I wanted to get me through the night. Male companion, female companion, both?" It was starting to look like the answer would be neither. At one point, Brianna dreams about her great-grandmother, Entendre Pandora, who also served in the Corps, as I said. And part of Brianna's insecurity comes from the fact that she's constantly being compared to Entendre. And during that dream, Entendre suggests that maybe Brianna might be better off finding a regular companion instead of constantly hiring companions. Without giving too much more away, I will say that Brianna's insecurities do come back to bite her in the ass and almost cause her death. But she overcomes them and successfully completes her assignment. Now, you may be rightly asking yourself, what's the problem? With a female protagonist who happens to be bisexual, I found myself thinking about removing any hints of insecurity and neurosis from the story so Brianna wouldn't be perceived as weak, even though I show her as being a capable soldier subduing 7 of the kidnappers without much effort. There is a point where Entendre suggests Brianna find a companion, as I said, as if suggesting that as a woman she needs a companion, even though Brianna does function quite well on her own. I also found myself thinking about removing any hint of Brianna being bisexual because someone might think I was pushing a particular gender or lifestyle, even though it plays no real part in the story. In all honesty, my characters all start out straight until they tell me otherwise. Now, mind you, at that point when I was still doing that editing, the only person to read the story was me. And after the last edit, I started handing it out to people to read and comment on. Of the people who read it, did any of them mention any of the things that I was stressing over? No, not one. In fact, as I said, all the feedback I got was very complimentary. None of them even mentioned the 3 typos that I found towards the end before I hit submit. Excuse me, I have a critter problem. Sorry. So, why was I stressing? Why was I not following my usual path of telling my stories the way I want to tell them, which is why I started self-publishing in the first place? Simple. I stopped thinking about telling the best possible story and started thinking about those unseen readers. Everyone wants readers to like their work and recommend it to others and come back for the next story. Would any of the aforementioned stress points drive readers away? I don't know. I've only sold a couple copies so far, and no one said anything about it. The 2 reviews that have been posted on Amazon didn't even mention anything that I mentioned above. So I got over it eventually, banged my head against the wall until I came to my senses, and the story would remain unchanged, typos corrected, of course. So I made a cover, and it was published around mid-June. And one of the reasons I became an independent author and started self-publishing was the freedom that it gave me. I could tell my stories the way I wanted to tell my stories. My characters would be the people I found interesting, who presented both good and bad qualities, who have both strengths and weaknesses. Basically, my characters are as human as I can make them, with all their faults and fears. So I stopped worrying about complaints that haven't been made yet. If someone doesn't read a story because of Brianna's character traits, well, too bad for them. Their loss. Um, and that's really about it on Brianna and the Three. It actually turned out to be one of my favorite stories. I would call it probably a close second after On a Cold Wind. I'm not certain right now if there'll be anything else, if there'll be another story for Brianna Pandora. I definitely do want to tell the story that leads up to it, the story of her great grandmother Entendre, because that is a the important story, if you will, that leads to the setup that we have now. Um, and I guess that would be it for Brianna and the Three. Just a little bit about looking forward to where I am going to go from here. In fact, after I finish this and run one errand, I have to start editing um, one of the two completed stories that I have. It's called Under Upon a. I have two minutes. I have two projects that start with words that begin with U, and I keep getting them confused. This is Upon a Far Distant Shore. Uh, some of you have known me for a while who may have heard me say that I've always wanted to write a superhero story. This is it, or as close to a superhero story as I can get. And then it's also kind of lays the groundwork for all my EGS stories in the future. But that's for another time. Um, I will be doing another one of these in about 2 weeks. Probably I'll just talk generally about why I started writing, why I write, why I keep writing, why I keep publishing, even though nobody apparently wants to read anything. Um, and then we'll just move on from there and we'll see what happens. Um, so, this will be on YouTube later. And before I forget, the links, of course, for Brianna and the Three can be found on the website, wordboy1.wixsite.com/wordboyswords. Uh, Thanks for watching and talk to you later. Bye.